You've been back aboard with us! We have a superb interview guest this week, one that has made his mark on prolific art and design on Deep Space Nine! It's Ricardo F. Delgado, and he's with us. I'm Bryan, Kreutz, ambassador to the fans. She's Lili Fox-Lim, who is the fans' envy as the greatest Star Trek expert. And you found a captain's log. You know, a great captain was once quoted saying, "The greatest danger facing us is ourselves, an irrational fear of the unknown." But really, there is no such thing as the unknown, only things temporarily hidden.
Or Captain Kirk in the early days, yes, that was from the Corbomite maneuver. Kirk reminds his crew that humanity's greatest hurdle is overcoming a fear of the unknown. You know, Kirk was such a handsome leader.
Yes, he was. Captain James T. Kirk set the standard for a captain's log itself, which is where our show's namesake is etched in Star Trek history, logging all the adventures and interviews, news, Lili's points of views, and perfectionism and preciseness, because it's uncanny how much Star Trek you know.
Oh, Mika, well, you know a Trekkie thing or two or three with me. But yes, it's lengthy log entries into Star Trek's prevailing persistence to endure 58 years.
What?
And we love it so much we get to pass on to our fans this knowledge and our anecdotes from Andoria each week. But we do have some bittersweet Star Trek news,
Yes,
BK.
we do indeed, Lili. Let's start with the good news, though. Star Trek Strange New World Season 4, as a renewal continues Gene Roddenberry's humanistic utopian universe of human spirit aboard the USS Enterprise under Captain Christopher Pike. However, the bad news: Beckett Boehm's Tendi Rutherford and Lily's favorite Vulcan T'Lyn with the hairpin will be ending after season 5. What? Are you kidding me?
Stop making me laugh. I'm supposed to be somber. The old Vulcan axiom, nothing unreal exists. And since Lower Decks is an animation, it's not real.
Really? Okay. I always consider this. Okay.
Maybe Netflix will pick up Lower Decks, just like Prodigy.
That's right, they did. Yes, I totally agree. Lili, you're right. And there's a lot of hope for this, but you know, I don't know. Is this like a deft parallel to Terran philosophers?
Ooh.
Wait a minute. Did I have too much Centaur? What? Are you kidding me?
Probably you did.
You're saying Lower Decks doesn't exist because it's an animation according to Vulcans?
Hear me out.
Okay.
I was trying to get a reaction out of you. If you attempt to model something logically in the maths and logic itself, then sometimes one can end up drawing absurd conclusions about reality. Money and business are the major factors in Hollywood and at Paramount. Yes. Because, BK, you and I know this show Lower Decks is a rock star hit among the Trekkies and is loved by many newcomers, trailblazing Trektastic leaps of illogic and comedy.
Yes! An interwoven Trek world paralleling that of Star Trek The Next Generation. It's an animated form with Flava Flavs of comedy and charisma. That's what Lower Decks is all about, right? But I'm just as miffed as you, Lili. I can't wait to see the 5th season, that finale. So, in Alex Kurtzman's words, saying it's a miracle the show lasted even 5 seasons in today's world really isn't what us Trekkies want to hear, is it? No. But we are grateful to know in today's world it was a long series run, and knowing the crossover episode seeing Beckett and Boehm's in live action, there could be hope for a reappearance, right?
Ooh, radio! That's our Star Trek news for today.
Oh, wait a minute! The backward sarcastic Vulcan salute! Oh, you are pissed.
That's right, my version of the thumbs down for canceling Lower Decks.
As always, Lili, I do agree with you. And we don't have many moments like this where we're unhappy with Star Trek production. You're making me laugh. So, your lovely meat hooks of Beckett Mariner miming are good, right?
I'm glad we agree. Let's both do it. Back at a moment's notice.
A captain's log returns in a moment.
Welcome back to A Captain's Log. Our guest interview is the very talented Ricardo Delgado, who possesses a plethora of notable illustrations that shaped the insides of Space Station Deep Space Nine and later Star Trek First Contact. Ricardo is a husband and father of 2 children, becoming a Trekkie enthusiast, fueled perhaps by the success of also possessing talents as a comic book creator, novelist, concept artist, storyboard artist, and instructor.
Yeah, so many fascinating avenues of talents Ricardo has contributed to Trek lore and really Hollywood for that matter.
Absolutely.
So Ricardo, welcome to A Captain's Log.
Thank you, Brian. I'm happy to be here. Happy to talk about, honestly, one of the great experiences of my career and the first big break I got into this business.
Ricardo, I wanted to ask you this first question. What led your appetite towards illustration and art at a young age, then opening up the door to be seen artistically by standing out?
I just kind of grew up being a kid that loved to draw, and at a certain age, I discovered the Art of Star Wars books. If we could talk about that other thing for a little bit. And, I just kind of continued to pursue that dream of, boy, these drawings are pretty cool. I like to draw. Why not try to draw for design stuff for movies? I think I was in junior college when I read that one of my heroes, Ralph Mcquarrie, one of the big visionaries of the Star Wars universe, had gone to Art Center College of Design. And so I applied, I got in, and Art Center at that time was really based on, the illustration department was based in either advertising illustration or editorial illustration. Advertising illustration was sort of West Coast, and the East Coast was for editorial stuff, okay? Mm-hmm. I didn't want to do that. I wanted to work in film. I wanted to design stuff, and I wanted to see my stuff in the Art of books. I got an interview to show my stuff to Richard James on Next Generation. I think I just cold called. Back then, you could actually look in the Hollywood Reporter. On Fridays, they had a listing of all the productions, and I saw Star Trek Next Generation, Paramount lot. I just called the Paramount lot, asked for the Next Generation art department. Someone picked up the phone, and actually it was Jim Magdaleno, who was the PA on that show, who became an incredible illustrator himself, film illustrator himself. He works, does some amazing work. But anyway, I think I came in to show Richard James my stuff, and then he said, there's another Star Trek series starting up, and that kind of got my attention. I'm like, excuse me? And he said, yeah, I'll recommend you to them.
Now you're throwing around heavyweight names in the Star Trek world. Jim Magdaleno, Richard James. Who's next that you'll meet? Herman Zimmerman?
Yet about a month later, I did get a call, and it was from Herman Zimmerman, and he had me come in and looked at my stuff, and I was not in the union back then. And so in those days, they had what were called junior and senior illustrators, okay? Mm-hmm. And on Next Generation, for example, Rick Sternbach was a senior illustrator, okay? And deservedly so. And so what Herman was looking for was a junior illustrator. And I was like, hey, you know what? I'll run through a wall. I don't care. Let's sign me up. And yet he said, well, what we have to do is we have to clear the list first. And I have to call people that are available. And if everyone turns the job down, then you get the job.
So I take it you got the job, Ricardo?
So I got the job. And thus a career was born.
Ricardo, you began your impressive career in Hollywood having had a hand in a very successful Emmy-nominated animated series, The Real Ghostbusters, prior to you joining Star Trek Deep Space Nine and the 1996 film Star Trek First Contact. Tell us about this start in the industry as a prop designer for the iconic Ghostbuster franchise.
For a while, I worked in television animation, doing background designs for stuff like The Real Ghostbusters way back when, but I had the dream of getting into film. And so back then, if you wanted to work in movies and TV and whatnot, in what they call live action now, you needed to get into the old Illustrators Union, which was called Local 790 back then, Illustrators and Mad Artists. Now it is all Local 800, which is the Art Directors Guild. So I looked up Robert Abel Associates in the old phone book. They used to have these phone books, everybody, that you could, open up and you could look through, and it was, quite antiquated. And so I found Robert Abel Associates. I called and I asked for Robert Abel, and I got him on the phone. And Robert Abel, at that point, had done the visual effects for Star Trek: The Motion Picture. Okay, and I don't know whether Mr. Abel is still with us or not, but he must have been like, who is this kid calling me, man, and saying, hey, can I come down and show you my portfolio? Sounding like a teenager, and he was very nice. I was basically saying, hey, how can I show you my portfolio, or how can I meet Ron Cobb, and he was very nice, and I ran into a lot of very patient people that were like, all right, this kid just he wants to do stuff, and let's kind of hear him out. And at during all that, I would I found out about DIC Animation probably from looking at the credits of Ghostbusters and whatnot. They were in Burbank. I called DIC Animation. I said, hey, I want to show my portfolio to somebody. And they said, sure, come on in, show your portfolio to so-and-so. And so there were a couple of shows that were looking for people. And I went in, and I swear that was like my first job. I really didn't know what to ask for in terms of a salary. I was just really, green behind the ears. I had no experience whatsoever. I still had my art center portfolio, and just based on that, they looked at my stuff and said, hey, would you like to draw some props for Ghostbusters? And I was like, sure, why not? And that's kind of how it started. It was really neat to see, that was the first time I saw my name in the credits of a TV show. Again, that was just kind of that show, and my experience in television animation before Deep Space Nine kind of taught me how to be somewhat of a professional, right? Like, I think my first day, they said, there's a desk. I started drawing, and somewhere around noon and 1 o'clock, everyone left. And I was like, wow, where'd everybody go? That's strange. And so, and when I got really hungry, I go, oh, okay, I guess everybody went to lunch, And so it just kind of went that way. Started meeting other artists, and some of them became friends that I'm still friends with to this day, to be honest, And from there, I went and did a couple other shows. I didn't go from DIC to DS9. That would have been, crazy, honestly. But
Yeah.
But I wanted to do live action. I think I did a few freebie jobs or low pay jobs in live action just to build a live action portfolio as well. So, looking back on it, I was pretty fired up, and I'm kind of glad that, number one, everyone was pretty patient with me, and number two, that it worked out.
Wow, not only were you involved with the long-running Ghostbusters animated series, but also one of my favorites, G.I. Joe! As a real American hero, but you were a background designer, and you did props on G.I. Joe, didn't you?
G.I. Joe was in the same building as at DIC as Ghostbusters, and the I think, if I remember correctly, the fifth and sixth floors of the building that we were on, which was across the street from the Paramount lot.
Oh wow!
Okay?
Really? Okay.
Yeah, and kind of a side story from that. Back then, a lot of us would go to lunch on the Paramount lot, but we had to go through the guard gates. But you had to kind of like act like you belong there. Like if you walk in and you're looking around, the guard's going to say, hey, let me see some ID. What are you doing here, right?
Yeah.
But if you walk in like, yeah, I got to go to this meeting, usually they would let you go. You'd never get away with that now. Never get away with that. Everyone's got to show ID, and, you got to have a pass and all that.
Yeah.
But we'd go on the lot, and you could have lunch there, and they had like the Warner Brothers store, and you could buy CDs, and back when they had VHS, right?
Yeah, remember?
Yeah, so that was pretty cool.
Ooh, nice, the Paramount lot. I mean, you were close already, even doing animation.
G.I. Joe was one of the shows on the fifth floor, which was all the shows in the production were on the fifth floor. Sixth floor was sort of the executives and development, and so I was really never up there. I was only on the fifth floor, and I think G.I. Joe was my second show after the season of Ghostbusters wrapped, and there was so much work for Saturday morning television back then, something that doesn't exist anymore. A lot of young people don't understand that Saturday morning TV, Saturday morning cartoons, that was big business back in the day, and it was an important sort of segment of the entertainment industry is television animation for Saturday morning. And so I kind of rolled onto G.I. Joe and started doing props and backgrounds. You know, that show was kind of already a big hit, right? It was already well represented in terms of, I think it had multiple seasons already before I got on it. And I had a ball creating, you know, different parts of the world, you know, pretty intricate props here and there, and I had a really good time. You know, I enjoyed my time on G.I. Joe. Those are analog shows, which means we had to none of that stuff. This is like at least 5 or 6 years before the digital revolution of Photoshop.
Really?
So everything was hand drawn at that point, right? So we were drawing on tissue paper, what they call onion skin or bond paper, and Xeroxing it, you know, that kind of stuff. So it was really, you know, a really incredible experience. I will say that back then, one of the most amazing things I saw is that so the script was generated and the voice recordings were created, and then all of the designs, including the background paintings and the character designs and the color models, were put into a package, and then someone would take that package down to LAX, and then they'd fly with the package to Tokyo to give to the animation company. And
Really?
then, yes, and so they would hand off the packet. Again, there was no server, there was nothing to upload, right? I mean, you had to physically fly over there, hand the package off to the animation company, and then fly back. That's how stuff was done back then. When you're just a background or a prop designer, you're done with it and you hand it off. But someone was kind of responsible for that. That's a whole show, right?
Yeah.
If you think about it, those are all the recordings of all the characters, you know, for the animators overseas, right? All of the background designs, all the prop designs, all the background paintings, what they would call background keys, right? So if it's a scene, let's say a temple in the jungle scene, if you will, there's one key painting of the temple that for the individual shots of the scene, you'd have to create sort of background paintings, secondary, tertiary paintings. So that's how that stuff worked back then, you know?
Wow! Lots of steps just to get it produced. And I believe you told me before the interview, Ricardo, a package of all these drawings and the paintings and background keys had to be taken to LAX and flown to Japan to the animators. That's pretty impressive.
It is.
So let's talk about Star Trek Deep Space Nine. You were primarily known for being the illustrator in pre-production in '92 and for the entire 20-episode season run in first season in 1993. Tell us about how the job came about and your specific illustrations, like the incredible interiors, like Ops, which was essentially the bridge on DS9. Also illustrating the promenade, plus the storefront where I believe they sold Jumja sticks.
Yes.
It was later like a Klingon food store or something as well. But you were part of the full-fledged illustrations. Can you talk about this, please?
So, because the junior pay scale was so low, everyone turned down the job, and I got it. And so, the reason that I'm on many levels, I'm thankful to Deep Space Nine, in addition to the stuff that we're going to talk about right now, is the fact that it got me most of my days as a junior, and I think I only needed less than 50 days when because I was on the show for about a year straight, you know, and so anyway, I got hired. Herman said, you know, you're in the union, well done. The union called me. I had to pay a lot of money to join the union, you know, all that stuff. Right. Get sworn in. It was serious business, and I had to report to the Paramount lot. And for a while, I worked from home. But I would show Herman my stuff once a week, I think for the first couple of months. And then I came in and, started meeting everyone that was on the show. And the thing that's really beautiful about Deep Space Nine and kind of the cleverness of Herman is that, number one, he was really good at young talent, spotting young talent. And number two, he balanced that out with experienced Star Trek people, right? So he had like Michael Kuda, Denise Okuda, Doug Drexler. Doug had done a lot of makeup stuff, and he was brought on as a graphics guy, and Doug is his own gravitational singularity, right? In terms of, how do you go for being a a makeup guy to a graphics guy, right? But he did it, you know? And so we had two set designers, three of them actually. The two that I can remember are Nathan Crowley and Joe Hodges, and both of them became production designers in their own right.
Mm-hmm.
I think Nathan has actually worked if not exclusively, but the majority of his career with Christopher Nolan.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and so
Big name.
That's kind of a name, yeah. And so, you know, we just sat down and we just jammed, and you know, it was really neat to see the stuff that I generated start to be put into the process of being designed as architectural sets by the set designer,
Mm-hmm.
right? And then sometimes they did foam core models. Like there was a foam core model of the bridge ops, right? That was really cool to see. Who knows where that thing is now, you know? But it was again, like you know, there was also like sometimes the sets were approved to a certain point. Like for example, Herman would take the stuff that we generated and he'd take it to Rick Berman and the writers and the producer, but primarily Rick Berman. You know, if I'm remembering this incorrectly, then it is what it is. But in the case of Ops, when it was approved, at the end, Berman was like, "Hey, I like everything but the screen." So there was different. So then I had to create different iterations of the actual viewing screen, and that's kind of the production illustrator's job, you know, to come up with that. The stuff that I was generating was also kind of had to fit with what Rick Sturbach and Michael Kuda and everyone else was doing to create the exterior of the ship.
Wow, such a fascinating, integral part of illustration you had shaping DS9 on the edge of the wormhole in this new Cardassian design that viewers never really saw before.
You worked closely with senior illustrator Rick Sternbach and also art director and production designer Herman Zimmerman. Can you describe the working relationship you had with each of these gentlemen and the respect that they had for you, coupled with a cool story?
You know, Rick Sternbach was already established as the, you know, Star Trek illustrator guru. And, you know, how could I explain it? In the end, we kind of both did our heavy lifting on the show in the sense that he took like the superstar stuff deservedly and he ran with it and did what he did. And I, you know, worked more closely with Herman with the sets, right? Constructing or designing the sets, you know, and yet, you know, all that stuff had to fit together. The stuff that Rick did and the stuff that I would come up with, you know, would be would have to work together really well. And it was a very fertile time creatively. I do remember one time, you know, I showed sometimes when I'd finish a drawing and I'd say, "Where's Herman?" And he and the art director Randy McIlvaine, they'd be on stage. So all right. So I would actually take my drawings. I'd run downstage, and Herman had the nickname Z, like, "Hey Z." So Herman would be sitting there, and Herman has this very classy, very dignified, deep voice, and he'd be sort of talking with the construction people, and here's this kid runs up to him like, "Hey Herman, here's this drawing. Do you want to look at it?" You know, and looking back on it, I was like, what was I doing? I could have just waited for him to get back, you know, but
Yeah.
ever patient, ever, you know, kind.
A captain's log returns in a moment.
On Star Trek First Contact, were you and the other concept artists and illustrators like Alex Yeager and Deborah Everton tasked with finding a new Borg drone enhanced look, working with John Eves and Joseph Musso? Or is this something that came up after you envisioned the mechanics and literal coming together of the Borg Queen to complement her with an army of enhanced drones on a bigger scale and bigger budget?
Most of the stuff I did was like more development stuff, okay?
Okay.
And so then I think that there was more development done alongside by Alex and by John. And then, you know, the magnificent Deborah Everton had to make that practical. Like, okay, now let's take all these crazy insect Egyptian drawings and how do you build these things? And there's that layer, like we've discussed with the non-predator predators and the ship that we just talked about. Like how do you make these things practical with the time allotted and then the money that we give you, right? And I think that that's what Deborah and what Michael were charged with. I think in the end it went like this. It was Deborah Everton, Mike Westmore. I think that's the way it worked out.
I see.
So,
Okay.
so that's why the collar is kind of like here. I was just kind of like the early idea guy.
Okay.
More like, oh, we really love that, and oh my God, we really definitely hate that. So we'll kind of go with some of this stuff. And I see, sprinkling of my stuff in the final versions. Like there's some Borgs that have kind of arms folded, insect-like, and like,
Yeah.
okay, I see that. That works out pretty well. Very definitely, I worked a lot on the Borg Queen. A lot of my stuff is still around, and I would say that's kind of one of my signature characters that I worked on, and I'm proud of the stuff I did. If you see the final result, it kind of really doesn't look a lot like what I did, and yet from the suit, I think from the suit there's a lot of similarities from the makeup stuff. They went with some really beautiful sort of wire, then tubes, and sort of the idea that it sort of grows into the back of the skull, which I think worked out really, really wonderfully.
A captain's log returns in a moment.
Welcome back to Captain's Log. Our show takes pride in bringing you interviews with vital crew members behind the Star Trek crews and Captain on Camera. This week, Lili and I welcome the never casual caretakers of constructive coalescence, bringing together the cast and crew from one end of the stage and studio in escorting, errand running, and eavesdropping on a scene with a very important holistic approach.
And most importantly, having been a PA crew member myself here in Hollywood, production assistants, aka PAs, are the lifeblood of smoothness in TV and film. We'll continue part 2 of this interview next week. Bye for now.